Good evening. I'd like to call the September 12th, 2017 Select Board meeting to order. I'm acting as chair tonight. Gary Von Stange is out of town. So with that, I have a couple of opening remarks I'd like to make. First and foremost, even though it's the day after 9/11, I would like to, both personally and on behalf of the board, acknowledge certainly all of our public safety responders, first responders that responded to that disaster in New York at that time. And all of us, just think a little bit about those type of people, put themselves on the line for all of us in a state of emergency. So I thought that was important to recognize, and that's why I did it. I would like to ask the group collected here to be very civil tonight with our meeting. I've reviewed the proceedings of the last meeting, and I would like to do it a bit different. If you're agitated or upset, I please ask that you go out in the hallway and calm down and come back in. There'll be plenty of time to make your comments, whatever has to be done, but I don't want any raising of voices or anyone getting upset about things. We need to conduct this meeting civilly. It's very important to me that we do that to show a good example to everyone. The other thing I would like to do is welcome a new business to Shelburne Road. It's called Furniture Discounters. They've just opened. I see they have a flag in front of their building. It's nice to see activity on that part of the corridor there. For a long time, we've had vacant buildings and that type of thing. So I think it's important to recognize that maybe there's a little bit of life coming to that part of town. So with that said, I would like to look at approving the agenda. Does anyone have any comments?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's approved 4-0. I would like to review and approve the minutes of August 22nd. Does anyone have any comments? Josh, do you need a copy to look at?
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I don't have mine in front of me. But I think it was on.
Don't write on that one, but
No,
go
I
ahead and
won't.
use it.
And it's really not terribly that important, but I think, and Jerry, you can look at this with me. But I think I had this circled on mine. Okay, on page 14, I believe, under number 12, this statement, I think I made, not you. That's the only.
14.
Wait, what?
Page 14, number 12, second paragraph. Jerry Story asked about provisions for expenditures.
No, I did.
You did? Okay, I'm sorry.
You asked, you had another question.
Well, I couldn't find it, so that's what I thought I said.
Oh, okay.
If that's the case, then I will leave it as stand.
Move to approve.
Second? Anyone?
Second?
Second by Josh. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting. Our next item is public comments. Public comments related to anything that's not on the agenda. So if the general public would have any comments for us, we'd be happy to entertain them at this time. Please come to the microphone, state your name for us, and
Janet Lake. And I would like to know why this board chose to allow my neighbor, 107 Maple Leaf Lane, Andrew Richardson, give him a variance when he built the garage illegally 3 feet from the property line.
okay, I don't know anything about it off the top of my head, so we'll have to get back to you. Can you make sure Joe has your contact
He has it.
information? Okay.
And we've talked about it, calling.
I remember.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll get back to you. Anyone else?
Sean Moran, resident of Shelburne. I would like to know, a couple of weeks ago, there was a letter in the Shelburne News commenting on how the town manager was doing such a good job, and there were zillions of people who were happy with his work. There are also zillions of people, to use her phrase, who are not happy. And I return again to the issue with the police chief. And wondering why the board has never moved to have any kind of comment towards the town manager's, I won't say abuse of power, but because it's certainly within his right, but let's say lack of judgment in the way it was handled. Nothing from the select board. There are many in the town who would like to know why. Many in the town, and there's some who are very afraid to come forward, so I'm not, feel that the voices of Mr. Story and Mr. Dean are often muted because of the block from Ms. Parker, Mr. Carey, and Mr. Von Stang in voting 3-2.
It's Curb, by the way.
Curb.
Yeah. So,
So that's my comment. There's nothing we can do as to reviewing the town manager's job, but we certainly can in reviewing the jobs you do, because you're elected by us. You two were re-elected last year, I understand that. Gary comes up next year, and I hope he has problems retaining that seat, because he doesn't listen. His transparency is non-transparency. And I, for one, will fight him tooth and nail to get out of that chair. Thank
okay,
you.
well, I can't speak for him. You'll have to speak to him about
No, I
that.
understand.
So let me just directly answer one of your questions. So on an annual basis, we review the performance of the town manager. The five of us solicit public comments about it. We've sent survey instruments out. We've done those kind of things. And we compile the results of that interaction. And we have a frank, honestly discussion in private with Joe. He's not an elected official. We do it as we would do with any other employee. If you were in a public company somewhere, all the employees of the company don't review your performance, your supervisor does. So it's the same kind of thing here. He happens to have 5 bosses instead of 1. So that's the way we've handled it in the past. I expect that that's the way we'll handle it here in the future. To directly address your comment about blocking or 3-2 or those type of comments, I react to the information that's presented to me. I see it at the same time you do. I can't, because of open meeting law, collaborate with people to form opinions and say, hey, you vote for this, I'll vote for that. None of that goes on my watch or in my world, and that's the truth. So, you could think whatever you want, but that's the fact of it. And we try to have these discussions here and talk about it and vote our conscience at the time. That's all I can tell you. I'm not trying to passivate you. I'm just saying that's the way we deal with it. So.
Just a brief comment, sir. You don't treat Mr. Colangelo the way you treat all the other employees. I believe I'm correct in saying that. If that were the case, then perhaps we might have had a different outcome with Chief Warden. You didn't treat Chief Warden as you would all the other employees on an equal basis. I understand the structure that's set up, but that was a misstatement, I believe, sir, that you just made.
Just telling you the way it is. Any other public comments? Okay. We'll move to Select Board comments. Josh, would you like to start? Or?
Yeah, I don't really have anything anything to
Anything?
offer?
Jerry?
I'm going to follow on John's comment to note that at the same time, we're suffering with people in the southeast, certainly Florida and Houston as well. And much as I did, probably you've seen some of the broadcast footage and thought to yourself how fortunate we are with the public safety, fire and rescue folks that we have who protect us, look after us, are ready to deal with disasters and catastrophes of all kinds. And not often do we thank them, and when we do, we probably don't thank them enough. So this is another opportunity to say thanks to all of them who guard us and look out for our well-being.
Anything else? Are you good? Are you good?
It's all set, thank you.
Colleen?
Just to, in accordance with what John said about 9/11, in memory of a good friend of mine who was a state trooper in New York State, who passed away in March from glioblastoma, which has been designated as a 9/11 related cancer. And just that the memory of those that died and served on that day still continues. It's like, it's the gift that keeps giving, unfortunately. So thank you for mentioning that. Regarding the comment about voting block, it's unfortunate that that perception has been put out there. There's 5 people on this board, and so regardless of how the voting comes down, there's always the likelihood that it can be a 3-2 vote, and there's been many times that the votes haven't gone the way that I thought that they would, and there's times where. And I think that you mentioning that is a good time to remind everybody that the way somebody votes on one thing, you might absolutely agree with, and then you might absolutely disagree with the next issue. And you might not think that I represent you, but I know that I represent a good proportion of the population here in Shelburne. If that becomes not the case, then I won't be in office and somebody else can have a crack at it. And I will gladly step down. Right now, I feel like I do represent a significant population, and I do vote with my conscience. The same as you do on voting day, I vote every single day or every single meeting on issues here. Both.
Anything else?
Nope.
So I just have a couple of comments. I wasn't able to be here the last meeting, and prior to that, I did do what's called a ride-around with the police department for a shift. And it was a real eye-opener for me. It was a wonderful thing to do. Bruce Berlin and I drove all over town all night long. I spent the full 12 hours with them. And I'd just like to kind of talk through that just a little bit. I was very impressed with all of the officers who are on duty, their attention to detail, their dedication, and all the little things that they do that I had no idea that they do. Traffic stops for headlights being out on vehicles, catching speeders out here on Route 7 at 1 o'clock in the morning going 90 miles an hour, all kinds of things. We didn't have any bad calls. We did have a call to Harbor Place, a person having a diabetic reaction, but it was fascinating to see the dedication and the support. I was also impressed with the morale of the group, all of the officers who are on that shift and their interaction with the dispatch folks. It was impressive, to be honest with you. It was really, really good. A couple of things came up that would be good, and I'm promoting them here at the moment. It would be good to mark all our homes better so that they can see the addresses. A number of years ago, there was an initiative in town to put a little green sign with your address number in front of your house that's reflective and people can see it. The importance of that was dramatic for me, considering that many times out-of-town ambulances or fire service will come to town to do something, and if the house isn't clearly marked, it delays them finding the actual location. Yes, Google Maps is great, but if you're in the middle of a street and you've got a home on both sides and there's an emergency or something, you need to be able to know exactly where to go. So I've asked Joe to do a little bit of research on that program and see if we can bring it back to the forefront, because I think it would be a very good thing for us to do. It was a very nominal cost. Yes, Chief? Yes, sure.
Jerry Wimet, Fire Chief. We actually initiated that program through the fire department. If you go to the Shelburne Fire website, there's information on how to get those signs. We have them right at the station. We make them up at the station and we get them out too. So
Yeah.
that can go right through us if people.
Yeah,
need it.
that's what I was looking for, so thanks. So I think that's an important thing for us to do. The other thing is we had a number of hours to talk, so we talked quite a bit about a program called Neighborhood Watch. And a few years ago, that program was active here, kind of subsided some, and now the police department would really like to make it active again. No one knows our neighborhoods better than the people that live in them. And they would like us to engage with that. So that's something that I think we'll see more of, both in the Shelburne News and publicly, and we'll see if we can get some momentum behind that, because I think that's very important. The offices that I spoke to that particular night, I can't say it's all of them, but they were quite enthusiastic about it. So I think it would be important to bring that on. So. The other thing I'll say, just in concluding, is it'd be nice when the police officers drive through your neighborhood to wave to them and speak to them. They're trying to, be more active, more friendly in the community. It's a two-way street, as we all know. So I would encourage you, if you see them, to speak to them and engage them a little bit. Thank them for stopping by, that kind of thing. They amongst themselves have decided to talk to the youth in town and break down that barrier of us and them and fear and that type of thing. I think it's remarkable, and I think that we all owe them a great thanks for the way they do that. So that's some of what I learned, and I just wanted to share it publicly because it was invaluable. So, thanks.
I'll make one additional comment, because that reminds me about the effort that Sergeant Fortin made with the traffic safety group over the weekend at 4 or 5 in the morning to guard their activity. If you don't know, on Marset and Bacon, there is a demonstration of traffic calming and lane narrowing and crosswalk protection. Currently, some of you may have already seen it if you've driven that way. That's the project of the traffic safety group. Jane and Tom Zanatti are here and representing them. And it's noteworthy that Sergeant Fortin was up at 4 or 5 in the morning shepherding the effort, and it seconds your comment.
That's great. With that, Joe, if you could report
Nothing
in.
tonight, but I do send out a weekly update every Friday, so anyone who's not on my list, please email me and I'll put you on the list. All the weekly updates I send out are on the website as well. Thanks, Jerry.
Great.
Or John, sorry.
Yep, no problem. I answered anything tonight. Lee, say you're up next. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, Lee Suskin, Chair of the Shelburne Ethics Committee. You've asked me to give the committee's annual report. With me tonight is Bill Deming, another member of the committee. Bill is the only other member of the committee here tonight. I gave them the option of either listening in, or I would tell them what would happen and give them your comments and questions. Excuse me. I used a similar format that we used last year. You seem to feel okay with that, and I hope you feel okay with it this time. You all should have received copies. It's been posted on the website along with the agenda, so the public at least had access to it. I don't know if they read it, but to save time, I won't go through it word by word. Since you do have it, and I'll just give you the highlights. Our mission is to hear and resolve complaints, and we do that if and as they are filed. You want to know what qualifications, volunteers willing to serve the town and willing to look out for the public interest and the town's interest. What has the board accomplished in the past year? 2 complaints were filed in the past year, one in February and one just this past month. We have to meet in closed executive session to determine whether probable cause, whether the complaint establishes probable cause. The ordinance requires that. So we met in closed executive session on 2 occasions. In the first occasion, the complaint was withdrawn prior to the committee convening the committee convened, learned that the complaint had been withdrawn, so the committee did not make a determination of probable cause on that complaint. In the second case, the committee met, we deliberated for 2 hours, and we made a determination that the complaint itself did not establish the substantial facts and identify violations of the law that would enable us to make a finding of probable cause. So that case was dismissed, it's been sealed, and according to the ordinance, there's no access to that complaint. We meet monthly. Over the past year, we have revised our rules of procedure. We have conducted public outreach. We posted an article in the Shelburne News so that the public could understand what we do, what the ordinance says, how they can file a complaint. What does your board intend to work on in the coming year? We're going to act on any complaints that do get filed. We're going to work on revisions to the rules again, because we've learned in this past situation that there may be a need to revise the rules because of gaps and mistakes that are in the ones we adopted before. And the ordinance enables us to revise establish new rules. We're going to look at the ordinance itself to see whether there are any revisions that we might recommend to you or the town to adopt. We're going to look at, in this past year, the legislature enabled towns to establish ethics policies as opposed to just financial conflict of interest policies. So we're going to meet to consider whether we're going to be recommending ethical guidelines for public officials and for town employees. We haven't had that discussion yet. I don't know where that's going to lead. We're going to consider whether additional training of public officials is needed, and we're going to continue to provide public outreach through the Shelburne News or otherwise. How might the select board help our board? The select board could help by setting high standards for yourselves. The select board committee would like to authorize, we would like authorization from the select board for up to $2,500 without approval from the select board so that we can access that money without approval from the select board or town manager solely for the purpose of securing legal counsel when we need it to assist us to resolve a complaint involving a member of the select board or the town manager. Because there's maybe a conflict there and the town attorney is hired by the select board, we would like to be able to get our own attorney and know we have $2,500 because this may have to happen on short notice. We don't want to have to go to the select board or the town manager for approval. If you could do that, that would be very helpful. How might the committee help the Select Board? We're willing to assist you in promoting high standards of ethics. And I can't report that we have any significant challenges or anything to report at this time, but I will take questions.
Well, I do have a comment. I think that the public outreach you did this year was really good. I think it, certainly put in front of everyone that there is a committee, we're serious about it, and, please consider this, you know what I mean? I think it was good, and I think years past, it hasn't been as strong maybe, and that might be a bad word, but I think at least it was more public, right? So I think that was very good, and I appreciate that, because
Thank
I
you.
think it's, we all have to have a grounding in this, I think it's important that as elected officials, just as people, it's the way to live your life, and
Thank you.
I think that's the right thing to do.
Mike
so.
Ashew played a major role in making that happen, and he should get a lot of credit.
Yeah, oh, it's good. Anyone else have any
Yeah,
questions?
I've got a question for Joe, who might ask to refresh my memory. We discussed the access to independent counsel in last fall's budget, I was pretty sure, as a budget item. And I
We
don't...
made that request at budget time, yes.
Correct, but I don't recall whether it was a budget turn down or whether it was a philosophical or procedural.
I don't remember the details of the conversation, but the outcome of the budget season was that you didn't put the money in there. And I don't remember off the top of my head if that was because strictly for budget reasons or if there was a philosophical difference. But I do remember the conversation that we had during budget season.
Right. I don't remember getting an answer that we have that access. I think having that money, giving us authority to access the money out of the surplus, well, I forget what that fund is called, that you've accessed already on other issues, and letting us access it without specific approval and letting us know ahead of time, because sometimes we need it on 24 hours notice.
I mean, it can be funded, and if it's not expended, it's not expended, but I recall that discussion and look forward to it again this fall, because there's no question about the conflicts. mean-
And my question is, could it happen with the existing budget out of that, whatever that
Current,
fund is?
We'd have to get Joe's
All we need
help
is
with
your
that question, but-
authorization.
Yeah, we'd have to get Joe's, well, that's the question, Lee, whether the authorization ought to be budget or it ought to be just procedural. That's a good question.
That's my question. I would like
Yeah.
you to consider doing it procedurally.
Yeah,
Is there any reason why we couldn't? I recall there have been other situations where we have, on the spot, made a decision on affecting money. Just the one I was involved with, that we decided to pay for the the surveying bill of the supples, and that was done. I'm just asking, is there any reason why we can't do that tonight?
Yeah, I'd like to go back and look at what, if any, determination was made during the budget season, and then take it up maybe next meeting kind of thing,
And how would we find that out? Where would that record, where that information?
You have notes
be?
from the budget season. We'll look at those.
And we could talk with Peter about it.
it's a really good idea. I don't think there's any question there.
Thank you. It would be helpful if we can learn that as soon as possible.
No.
Yep. Yeah, we'll take the action to research it and come back next meeting and talk about it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Lee.
You have anything? Good, thanks, Lee. Sam, we've got your microphone there. You're on the camera.
Thank you.
Smile a little.
Smile.
Right up there. Yeah.
Got new hearing aids, and now they have voices in them.
Oh,
you know, and mine tells me, very charming, your battery is going low. And my wife accused me of talking in my sleep, and I answered it by saying, what do you suggest? Okay, well, the report from the Veterans Committee is a very good report. We've had a lot of success and a lot of obvious support from our town. So if anybody has suggestions, I won't do too much. I'd like to hear. Right now, without Colleen, I don't know what we do. She's our treasurer and our minute taker and has phenomenal energy. So the two of us as chair and are doing fine. Our biggest event at this time is the 20 farmers markets that we religiously are there every Saturday. And if it's not the kids climbing the trees that we're watching, it's helping people in walkers. I think we have an average age, the committee of 11, about 79 or so. And we have also have a wonderful group. Bud Ockert, who runs he's responsible for ceremony. Without Paul, we get a wonderful history when you have Paul with a straight face. And Art Cunin, who many of you may know as a cardiologist in town for many, many years, we came together. So he keeps our health up, things like that. But the Memorial Day celebration this year was with Don Condon, who delivered a wonderful, wonderful speech, and we reproduced it. And about 90 copies were taken out, and reminding us about what patriotism is really all about. We are now planning for the fall under Bud's tutorialship. And the Boy Scouts have just completed, there'll be a picture in the Shelburne News. We all went down to accept the platform, which he's built so that we can be lifted up at the ceremonial area. And it was a wonderful job. And he's a young man who just became an Eagle Scout and very, very interested in engineering as a future. And so we do work with the Boy Scouts, and there are a number of CVU students who do projects that have to do with veterans, which is extremely helpful. We hope to launch our history book, having each brick. We will have a short history and picture that would be in a library. We're a little delayed on that, but it's coming along. And we also have our brochure, which some of you have seen, which has helped a lot. And so our PR is managed by Perry Melvin. One of the things that you need to know is that a number of our veterans, like Pete Gatju, is very, very active with the Guard. Perry Melvin is president of the Vietnam Soldiers Group in the state of Vermont. So we have a lot of depth, and deciding what to do with it, offering maybe some lecture presentations. So we're trying to develop the membership by not getting just a group for supervision, or jobs, but for doing more in terms of get-together. Basically, budgetary, we do fine. We actually raise about $100 to $125 every Saturday, and that money helps us offset the very needed trimming that the monument requires before it becomes a jungle. We have to keep after the trees, which is our Korean maples, not of the current regime in North Korea. And the group in town, our management people keep the lawn pretty nice, so we hope in this next year we will move the responsibility for that to the town, town, and we will provide the programming and the supervision for it, which is Jim Donaldson. You wouldn't recognize him by face because he's always on his knees, weeding or doing something in the grass, so you can recognize him by his derriere. Yeah. We have a number of the spouses come and take care of the plants that need delicate managing, which you can't get out of the men. They're, pulling them. So the monument looks pretty good. I'm pleased, we have it now for 3.5 years, and I know I go down about 3 times a week, and I'm amazed how clean it is. And I've never found a butt there, so that speaks to the good health. Occasionally, there are a couple of night owls there, and I don't know what they're doing. Yeah, but right now, to a number of people in the room, Joe and Peter and Todd, if he was here, these people worked so that we effectively have water, electricity, and light. And if you noticed, at night we now have a permanent light on the flag. And so that has been lovely to see these things completed this year. So with that, I can only tell you good things, and you can tell me the bad things if there are any. Some of us are coming up. We have finished our terms, so we'll see a bit of changes in faces for the next year or two.
That's great. I think it's great that you were able to leverage the Boy Scouts' talents to help out there. I think we all know our Boy Scouts in this town are special people and really give back to the community and leaving permanent things behind. And having a son who did it, I'm quite proud of it. So I think it's a good thing. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate that.
I just want to add that the type of public outreach and the commitment to coming to all the farmers markets and setting up that canopy is much appreciated by no less than my two, with your eternal supply of beads and American flags and your infernal supply of popsicles or suckers or whatever those things are, which we found the last one stuck to the floor of the minivan. But they love them.
We now have ice water, which seems to be a real need. And about 2 weeks ago, Shelburne Day, we did have popcorn. And our usual $125 got all the way up to $200. So that was pretty good.
Wow.
We hope as the next 4 weeks cool off, we'll offer hot chocolate. We'll look forward to seeing you visit.
Great. Again, thanks, Sam. We appreciate your input. We'll move on to item 9, which is formalizing the select board comments regarding the wetland. Jerry has been our leader, I suppose, there, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a team effort, and we will be adopting tonight a formal Town of Shelburne written response to the Department of Environmental Conservation, to the state agency, which has received a petition from a third party to reclassify the La Platte wetlands from Class 2 to a Class 1. That reclassification will impact not only the town, its facilities and activities, but also a number of private properties and their activities as well. With the considerable help of the Natural Resources and Conservation Committee led by Gail Albert, and especially the magnificent help of Susan Mecklenburg, along with Peggy and Don and several others who all contributed. We have produced a verbal statement at the hearing recently held by the DEC here in Shelburne, and tonight are proposing the formal written response. And with that, and in recognition again of Susan's unbelievable help in this regard, I'm happy to turn it over to her to review for you.
Thank you. Do you want to do it sitting down, Susan? We can grab Sam's microphone there and... Just makes it easier, I think.
I believe you have the statement in your packets, right?
That's correct.
So I'm not sure how this usually happens in terms of, would you like me to read it aloud, or do you want to read it
I
yourselves?
think we've all read it.
Okay.
I'd say go through the high points for the general public here because they haven't seen it maybe, so.
Okay, and I want to emphasize I don't represent the state, I don't represent the Vermont Natural Resources Council who filed the petition, or I was asked to help simply because I'm an ecologist. And one thing that's important for the public to understand is that in cases of wetland classification and reclassification, the criteria are solely ecological criteria. So they base their decision only on the criteria, the natural resources, and the ecological value of the wetland that they're considering. So even though there are impacts to private property and town properties, those impacts are not part of the decision for the classification. That's my understanding. So in our formal statement, I first emphasized the value that many Shelburnites place on the La Platte River wetland and the enjoyment we get from it, and consider it our natural heritage, and we're lucky to have it. But then I listed a number, I believe there are 12 specific questions, and I don't actually have, Joe, the most recent copy, I'm sorry.
Or Josh's.
Is that the one? Thank you. So would you like me to read through all 12 questions, Jerry?
Yeah, I'd touch on them, just so people
All right,
know
all
what
right.
they are.
So these questions we are asking to have answered so that we can collaborate with the state, with the Agency of Natural Resources. We've initiated efforts to invite them to site visits. So if any property owners wish that to happen, our committee, and I believe Jerry, are willing to facilitate those site visits. So the 12 questions we have that we are asking for information on. Impacts of the reclassification on town properties, including the wastewater treatment plant, the salt storage shed, and the rescue facilities on Turtle Lane, as well as the Bay Road Bridge, which I believe is up for reconstruction. What would the reclassification have in the event of an accidental discharge from the wastewater treatment facilities? What, if any, support or compensation can existing property owners expect should conditions require alteration on their property? And this is important because a Class 1 wetland would have a 100-foot buffer extending all the way around it, a buffer zone. And within that buffer zone, any activity would require a permit, a new permit from the state. So that's why we asked that question. Number 4, what would reclassification mean for existing and future walking trails and paths? Number 5, what would reclassification mean if the town decides to try to stabilize banks along the La Platte River? Number 6, the state currently applies lampricide. It's a pesticide to control the lamprey population in the La Platte River. So we asked what would reclassification mean for that. We asked a number of questions about outputs to the river, such as the storm drains. We asked if reclassification would affect the potential dredging of the mouth of the La Platte River, which is filled in with quite a bit of silt. We asked if town properties could be granted a multi-year sort of overarching permit so that each and every little activity at the facility wouldn't need to go under the permitting process. And finally, in the petition itself, you are welcome to look at it. It's on the town website. And there is a listing of all potential property owners that might be affected by this reclassification. So I guess I would encourage people in town to refer to that list. And we ask the question if the agency plans to do outreach to all those property owners. And that's it for our specific questions. I guess we'll take comments now.
Anything else?
I might add, this process itself, the next stage is an eventual decision, possibly sometime this fall, by the state agency as to whether it will proceed with the idea. And then there's a following stage early next year at which, during which the agency, if it decides to proceed, will engage in rulemaking. So there are a series of events and opportunities for comment and exchange of information and opinion from here on as we go. I'd like to also acknowledge the tremendous help that Joe has, the town manager has been, as well as Dean Pierce and other staff. The success of our requests for agency site visits this fall, actual on-the-ground visits to various properties and situations so that we're confident they understand them feet first, as well as the ensuing discussions that will occur all fall. A lot of that depends greatly on the goodwill and very fine professional working relations that Joe and Dean have established with the same agency representatives, some of whom with whom the town is doing other things or discussing other things, not least, for instance, the dog park. So it's kind of nice and reassuring that as our little group completes this part of the task, that we handed off to Joe and Dean and others who are going to take the lead in the next few months, engaging the agencies, trying to interest them in what we feel our problems are, and potentially arriving at joint solutions. So I thank them. Once again, I thank Gail and her entire committee, and Josh was played an important role as well. It's been an example of team effort that the board could be part of, that a town committee could be part of, that makes very good use of the extraordinary resource this town has in its many, many volunteers who come together as committees and whose expertise is really formidable. So I thank them and all of you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jerry. Anything else on that matter? Gail, I don't know if you want to say anything, or?
I just want to add that I also thank the town administration and Joe, because the deadline for these comments to be put in was supposed to be yesterday, and in fact, our petition to ask to have it extended so that we could have people here tonight was granted.
Thank you.
I just want to really second Jerry's remarks, because I think this more on the process, because I think this is it's been such a worthwhile activity that it can form a template for how to deal with some of these problems in the future. I mean, as Jerry mentioned, just the ability for the select board members, the town committee, and other knowledgeable people in the town getting together along with the town staff has just really worked very well. I mean, this is an issue that was brought up. Everybody was not really quite sure what the potential ramifications would be, And through working through with all of the resources we had, we got most of the answers, and we came up with a pretty good product. And so I think this is something that we really should, process is something we should make use of in the future.
Thank you. You have anything? Good. We'll move on to the next item, item 10 in our agenda.
You gotta formalize those
You're
comments.
going to adopt it?
Oh,
have to adopt
yes,
those
I guess we
comments.
do, sorry. I'll entertain a motion to adopt these comments.
So moved?
The comments as drafted?
Right.
Okay.
So we have a motion by Jerry, seconded by Josh. Any further comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Now we will move on to item 10, which is talking about the hazardous materials ordinance, and, with that, so, Joe, I'll let you open that up and engage with Claudine if you want, and,
Sure, I'm happy to give it a shot. So I put it in the select board packet. It's also posted online. I got to be honest, I don't know if these are all of the comments that I received, but at least most of them, if not all of the comments that I've received, were posted as part of the packet. I also did forward them to our town attorney. We actually met yesterday formally to start looking at potential amendments. I don't want to speak for our town attorney Claudine, but I think we both agree that through the conversations that we've had with individuals who have submitted the comments and looking at the comments themselves, that I think it's fair to say that we think that there are some at least amendments that, in our opinion, is already stated basically in the ordinance, but maybe it could be clarified better. So I think there are some slight amendments that we think would be appropriate. And then moving on, I've done at least one site visit with a company that was interested. I've met with a few others face-to-face that have had interest since last meeting. So we'll continue to collect comments, and we've been taking them seriously, looking through all of them. And, I think that there'll be some proposed amendments to the select board as early as the next meeting to consider.
so just the process that we want to follow is to incorporate these comments, have a preliminary review of that document with all interested parties, warn a public discussion like we would normally do with an ordinance like this, and follow it that way. So I've asked Joe, prior to starting the meeting tonight, to put that timeline in his weekly report this week so that everybody can see that this is when we plan on doing these things, and, we can take it forward from that point. We are taking what people are commenting on seriously. We are considering it. Our attorney is here tonight because she's interested, so, we're not ignoring what people are saying, and I don't want anyone to have that impression. So, this is a serious thing. We understand that. We're trying to do best for all involved, so. Claudine, do you have anything you want to add?
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Claudine Zafar. I'm one of the town attorneys. I'm happy to answer questions, I guess, if people have questions. I don't know that I have anything specific to add, but I think some of the comments that we had the opportunity to review demonstrated that I think some folks may have some misunderstandings with respect to the ordinance and the actual area and properties that are subject to the ordinance. So I think hopefully those people that have reached out to Joe have gotten those issues clarified for themselves. And we have, as Joe said, received some very valuable comments, and we've tried to formulate some probably very useful edits to the ordinance, but I don't know if I can specifically answer any questions. I think that maybe that's, where I could be the most helpful, but.
Yeah, let's, see if there's any public comment and stand by. So with that said, does anyone have any comment they'd like to to add to this discussion tonight? Hi, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Matt Coda.
Yep.
I work for the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, which is a nonprofit trade association representing the retailers of heating oil, kerosene, diesel fuel, and propane. I've spoken to you before. I've had a great conversation with Joe at his office a couple of weeks ago, a similar conversation with Claudine Zafar, your town attorney. And some of the questions that I initially had were addressed, and I appreciate their time. We obviously have concerns with the implementation of this ordinance, how we're making fixes, but we still have is my understanding, a hard date and when this goes into effect. I believe it's October 8th, which was 60 days from the first reading? Not sure. Our concerns, some of our concerns were answered with regards to the 250-meter rule as it relates to schools and bodies of water, and how heating fuels, as I understand the interpretation from the town attorney and from Joe, are completely exempt. Completely exempt. You can have a heating fuel tank next to a school, next to a body of water. If that's the interpretation of the regulation, our attorney would like that clarified. We've submitted comments from our attorneys asking that to be clarified. But we also have concerns about other fuels not used for heat. When I say other fuels, it's the same fuels that we use for heat. Propane, used for cooking. Propane, used for drying. Propane, used for emergency backup power generation. Oftentimes, those tanks are within the limits of set in the ordinance, but they're not used for heat. They're used for other purposes, but they have a real value, and they have to apply to the same standards that state and federal regulations, which are rigorous, have to apply to, even though they're not for heat. The second is diesel fuel. Your diesel fuel limitations on, as I understand the regulation, are 500 gallons when it's within 250 meters of a school or public waterway. That's my understanding of the regulation. You have situations, including the town garage, where you have diesel fuel storage in excess of 500 gallons. And by my measurement through Google Maps, you are within 700 feet, which is less than 820 feet, which is 250 meters, of the Shelburne Community School. So the Shelburne Town Garage has a tank that is less than 250 meters, and it's near the school. So that would, in fact, they'd have to either downsize to 500 gallons, get an exemption, which I don't know if is allowed under the ordinance as written. And of course, we wouldn't want to downsize to 500 gallons, because if it downsizes to 500 gallons, we have to bring our trucks in more often to your community in order to fill up that tank. And that tank, that diesel fuel, is used for plow trucks and other heavy machinery that you need to keep the road safe. So I think having a 1,000-gallon storage tank where it is, it's in a great position. It's in the shade because you don't want condensation. It's away from the roof, so you're not going to have icicles fall on it. So we think that that tank should stay. But the overarching point is we're interested in the timeline, because the plane has gone off and we're going to fix the landing gear, but it's getting close to winter. And we would definitely like these clarifications when it comes to heating fuel, including kerosene. And we think that some of the regulations as they relate to fuels that we sell, fuels that are stored in the town of Shelburne that are not for heating fuels, that we understand that we are continue to be able to deliver to those tanks, and that our customers know that those tanks are good. Thank you.
That's great. I will say that your attorney's comments were spot on as far as clarification of the agreement, and frankly, we appreciate that. That's what we're trying to do here, not be hardliners that say, it's our way or no way, but to create that interaction so we can, incorporate those type of things. Everything you said tonight is critically important, and
Thank you, I appreciate that.
we're listening. We're not just sitting here letting you talk and then just ignoring you.
No,
So,
I understand that. Again, it's the implementation date that has us.
Right.
We definitely think there's work to do, and we're ready to roll up our sleeves and go to work. Can it be done before it's implemented? Or will it not be enforced? Is a soft enforcement period? Those are the things that I think need to be clarified as we go into this work session together to improve or fix it. Is the ordinance necessary? We don't think so. We don't think so. We think Vermont has some of the most rigorous regulations when it comes to storage of heating fuels. There's no question. There's federal laws that we have to obey by. But that said, we want to be able to work with you to make sure that fuel can continue to be distributed to people that need it, not just for heating,
Right.
but for transportation and for other machinery.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. Anyone else? Hi.
Trampus Demers from Shelburne Limestone. I too follow the same line as what Matt just said. I think that the October 8th deadline that was set in August 8th, in which it was, the ordinance was passed, and then it was granted a 60-day window in which before we created violations. Because the way I feel is that there's law-abiding citizens and businesses that are in Shelburne that on October 8th, due to the fact that the ordinance and the way it is written, are now going to be in violation. And if the board would go along with me, and I'm glad that there's the town attorneys here where I can present questions and get some answers. I came and met with Joe, as the board had suggested, on August 28th, in which we provided a written statement where we felt that we were not going to be able to fit into the ordinance, and asked if there were going to be exemptions in which it was implied, which I understand the board, the way the ordinance is written, cannot give. So that's why I feel there's a lot of work to be done to this ordinance, because we have no way to work with the people who are within the town, that have been within the town, of no fault of their own, in which an ordinance was passed. So my example here is under a facility in the definitions in the ordinance, it is listed, and that is in page 2 of the ordinance, that a motor vehicle is considered a facility. And if it is stored on site for more than 24 hours, then the amount of liquid that's in that motor vehicle will be considered as part of the aggregate amount of liquid that is on the facility. So if we go to page 3 under waterways, and we won't read them all, but brooks, rivers, marshes, ponds, and lakes. And therefore, if we were to take that definition just under face value, and we were to look at our car dealerships that are in the town of Shelburne, they are now not law-abiding businesses in the town of Shelburne, because we're going to take the aggregate sum of all of their fuel tanks that are in their cars, and we are going to put ourselves over the limit in table C, which is unleaded fuel, which would be in a car, of 500 gallons. And the 200 and plus cars that might be at one of the dealerships in the town of Shelburne would now be in violation. And that's why I think there's a problem with the ordinance. Because I don't think the ordinance was directed at anybody like that. And therefore, I am up here petitioning the board to say October 8th is way too soon to enact enforcement. So the other thing that I have a question on is in the website, the town website, in which there were answers that were posted as to what the definition of a fueling filling station is. And the reason that I'm concerned with that is because if I went with a definition in which the town manager told me, I am not in violation. Because I have a 15,000 gallon fuel tank in which supplies my equipment, which holds 200 to 300 gallons apiece. And if it is, by his definition, a fueling filling station, it is exempt. And therefore, my facility would become exempt. And so I asked him to call me back and tell me where I stand, because I need to know if I'm in violation and going to be docked, I think it was $800 a day, or whatever the violation number was. So therefore, I'm glad that the town attorney's here, in which had I believe, a big hand in writing the ordinance, I'm not sure of that. Is a fueling filling station a place where drivers can buy fuel and oil? Or is it just simply solving the town garage problem because they can dispense it into their trucks, and now it's a fueling filling station, and now the town fuel, over 500 gallon fuel becomes exempt? The next thing is that in number 6 of the ordinance questions and answers was, to back up my statement about the cars, is the ordinance prohibits storage in certain volumes in certain places. The storage is defined in the ordinance as being located on a site and in the facility for more than 24 hours. Understand that. A facility defined in the ordinance and not only includes things like buildings and structures, and we now have learned automobiles. Therefore, the quantities are calculated and applicable in the aggregate. So we have to look at all the vehicles that are stored on the car dealerships, or all my vehicles, my equipment that is stored and worked at the quarry, and we have to consume all those into the total aggregate for the facility. And therefore, based on that example and that example alone, and there's others in here, and I'm not going to bore you guys with it, I am petitioning the board to slow down, extend out the 60 days to whatever you feel is appropriate, but we have some serious work to do with what Colleen emphasized is a living document. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, we appreciate your comments. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Good evening. Thomas Murphy. I spoke a few meetings ago. I also submitted a letter I wrote this weekend to the board and to the town manager.
It's on the line, it's in the packet.
Thank you. As a follow-up to the town's own 1,000-gallon above-ground storage tank at the facility, I actually inspected that tank years ago on behalf of my company lead professional engineer. The reason I was there to inspect it was to bring the town in compliance with federal rules and regulations under 49 CFR 112's spill prevention, control, and countermeasures. It's a very standard regulatory program. If you store fuel above ground with an accumulative volume of greater than 1,320 gallons, you must abide by this federal EPA rule and regulations. I inspected the tank. It was in good condition. The facility was in good condition. My engineer stamped that plan, bringing the town into compliance. But as Mr. Coda pointed out, its location in close proximity to the school and exceeding the 500-gallon limit. I'll make one other point, because this is always a concern when you're inspecting facilities that store fuel. The waterway. McKay Brook is very close to this tank. It's probably less than 500 feet away. Which I think is kind of the point of the ordinance, was to continue to keep this town safe with respect to hazardous materials. So close proximity to the school, additional close proximity to the stream behind the wastewater treatment plant. The point I really want to make is that rule and regulation by EPA that has professional engineers inspecting fuel storage, it's in place. It's very robust. I said it at the first meeting, the rules and regulations the state has in place and our federal EPA law enforcement have in place do a terrific job with respect to making this town safe. I'll say it again, I say it in my letter, I don't think this ordinance is necessary for this town. Enforcing it is going to be a tremendous burden. Some of the way the ordinance is written could actually be putting people in harm's way with respect to response from the facility operator. As a professional in the hazardous materials field for over 20 years, I've gone through a lot of specialized training. Again, put forth by OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Administration. For the ordinance to direct the operator of a facility to respond to a spill isn't safe. Not every facility that stores fuel is certified in OSHA rules and regulations. A lot of times they contract that out. They have environmental consultants and environmental spill response teams, which are also part of these plans that I certify. So just because a facility has fuel doesn't mean that owner is qualified and certified to do that. So that was my biggest safety concern with the way the ordinance is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody on the board, any comments?
You know, I have a couple of observations and then several questions and then a proposal. It seems to me, listening over now weeks of this discussion, and the parallel to what we just finished describing for the La Platte reclassification is unavoidable here, wherein a highly technical matter was put in the hands of residents who are our resource and friends and fellow community members who are expert, who do have the necessary background and experience to deal with it, who were willing to teach the rest of us who had an interest in solving the problem. And it seems to me, first, as an observation, that that model could be followed very profitably here, in which case we would constitute a working group at the direction of someone of our choice, add one or two of us from the board who happily have the time and who would be quite willing to spend it in addressing these problems. Second, I'm concerned, as you've heard me say before, about the timing, because we are now quite rapidly approaching implementation date, and it does not seem to me that this will allow proper notice of changes, much less codification of the changes in time for those to be effective before the implementation date. I think the magnitude of changes are such, despite the heroic efforts of the town attorney and the town manager, which I respect and admire and am thankful for, it seems to me there are questions coming all the time, and likely would keep coming were we to recruit experts who could sit and take the time necessary to understand line by line the consequences of some of these provisions. In that case, I'd like to see in the meeting on September 26th a series of optional actions that the board could take, beginning with rescission and continuing on to extension of the implementation date for a considerable period of time, perhaps 3 months, and further to authorize, if not tonight, the presence of a working group to assist the board and the town in addressing these several problems. My proposal to you is, therefore, tonight, is to establish such a working group, even if it's not possible this evening to identify those such as the chief, Jerry, or Chris Boyd, or Tom, or any of the number of people who have dedicated a lot of their time, not just selfishly, to guard their own interests of their own company, but in the greater interest of the community. I don't have any doubt we'd have any difficulty raising such a working group, getting it organized, coming back on the 26th with a series of ideas, and at that time making decisions about whether to rescind, extend the implementation date, or begin making amendments as they are developed.
So I think that, Jerry, I agree with many of the points that you make, although I disagree with the characterization of the process thus far. This ordinance was passed almost a month ago. We're halfway through the process that we started a month ago, and we still have a month left. We've made tremendous progress. You stated that they are tremendous or substantive changes, and I think Joe specifically stated that they were clarifications of things that were already in the ordinance. And Matt, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you met with Joe and with Claudine, and that the meetings went well. And I'm hoping that that progress can be continued along with Mr. Demers. You know, I think there are probably some clarifications that Claudine could make now. I question whether that's as useful as doing the working group that you suggested, Jerry. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think there should be at least one select board member appointed or decides to contribute to this as well. And but I continue with my assertion that this is an ongoing process and that we're all working together to make this the strongest, fair ordinance. And I think it's an ordinance that's long overdue. You know, my motivation and where I come from is not just as somebody sitting here looking at a piece of paper, but it's as a parent and as a physician. And I have children at Shelburne Community School, and I very much care about our waterways. And in my specific field as anesthesia and critical care, I'm very, very aware of the capability of UVM and Fletcher Allen to deal with a mass casualty. And I have done burn debridements on children. And it's not fear-mongering to me. To me, it's a nightmare that has real sights and sounds and smells. And UVM Fletcher Allen doesn't have a dedicated burn unit. They have an adult ICU. Their PICU, their pediatric ICU, is one room inside the adult ICU that has a plaque outside that says pediatric ICU. That's it. So this ordinance is a good move. It's something that the town, having the town oversee, is just another set of eyes. And with all due respect to federal regulations and state regulations, Shelburne will take care of Shelburne in addition to the state and the federal regulations, not to replace. And this is, and thank you for saying that's a living document. It is a living document. If there's amendments that need to be made to make it clear to people that they will get fuel delivered, that they're not going to freeze to death, that will be clarified. But having this working group and being able to come up with these changes, there's nothing that says to me that this can't be done in the next month. If I'm wrong, I'm happy on September 26th to make a change to extend this 60-day period of time. So far, I just haven't seen any evidence that we're making backward strides. We're going forward. We're working together, and that is part of the process. So, Jerry, I like the working group idea. I think that that's a fantastic idea. I'd love to see what the timeline might be that we could get that group together, and maybe that's something that it could be worked on, and then the rest of the select board members can be contacted.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, if we extend the implementation, then the time pressure's off. The problem right now is we have time pressure.
Right.
And while everyone might be enthusiastic about the process, there are some people who are hurting badly here,
Right.
who furthermore don't have any option but in a matter of weeks to plan for some serious disruption of their business. And you cannot just, you cannot will away an ordinance. If it's in effect unenforceable, that's worse than having not one at all. I mean, that's a concern on my part too, the enforceability. So it seems to me that if we're all willing to put on the agenda next meeting, implementation, a date of January or whatever, that would relieve a very false pressure at the moment, which is time. If at that point, it's a decision of the body that we don't need to rescind, we just need to do major repairs, fine. Whatever improves it, whatever fixes it. My concern is that by the time we get finished on September 26th, this ordinance is in effect. And unless we do all of the changes on September 26th, and sitting here tonight, I can guarantee you, I can't even imagine that happening in the next 11, 12 days, despite heroic efforts and lots of time, then I think we ought to commit to extending the implementation date, relieving the time pressure, making some arrangement then to get the help of a working group and continue the efforts that Joe and Claudine have established in terms of technical repairs.
So, I'd like to take a step back in all of this and sort of look at this whole situation from a sort of a larger perspective, or at least the perspective that I'd like to think about. I think all of us up here are here because we're interested in using the best available information to make decisions in the best interest of Shelburne. As a scientist, I'm used to working on making decisions or making analyses based on the best available data possible. So what I see in this whole situation and all of the information that has been provided to me, I have some degree of experience with hazardous materials, certainly not as much as people who have commented on this. I see that the information that's provided, I really haven't seen any information, with all due respects to Colleen, where there's any evidence that any of the residents of Shelburne are in danger. Nobody has come forward to suggest that, to suggest any specific incidences or go back. The statement that this has been under discussion for a long time, I'm not aware of any discussions of it. So it all brings back to the comments that a number of people have made as to why have we spent the amount of time and effort and cost, the number of people who have come to the meetings, this is all their time. I appreciate all of you for doing that. However, I'm not quite sure why we got here and why we need to move forward in any way other than as Jerry and as one of the possibilities and has been suggested by others. This ordinance isn't needed. It just needs to be rescinded. If you look at the comments, if you look at all of the comments, if you look at all of the problems, it strikes me that this ordinance was crafted in a way without knowledge of hazardous materials and what the potential ramifications of passing this ordinance. In another way, that we learned at the last meeting, it may have been passed based on erroneous information presented to the select board about where the fire chief stood on this, which was a factor in this, the passage. So I think we spent an awful lot of time, everyone's time, and I don't see the data. I mean, people have provided us lots of data which essentially says this ordinance isn't going to do anything. This ordinance is going to cause more problems than it's worth. So I just would like to, I think the idea of a working group that certainly the fire chief would be the excellent person to lead this with that expertise, and we've already seen the expertise we have in the town. That moves forward, but there have to be some very specific decisions made at the next meeting to ensure, to give everyone in the town the comfort to know that this ordinance is not going to adversely affect them.
So with that said, what I said at the beginning was I've asked Joe in his notes for the end of the week to articulate the timeline of potentially a working group to incorporate the comments that have been made and look at certainly putting a discussion into the next agenda. And maybe we have to have a special meeting to talk about this in the interim in between, but we'll consider that, once we see where we're at, so.
But with all due respect, I don't know why we're wasting another week. I mean, come on, we're adults, we're here, we're ready. There's a common understanding, I think, of this problem, and I don't know why further we should burden Joe with it. I think it ought to be our decision tonight.
Make a motion, sir.
That we say, unfortunately, this is not an action item, so we're going to run into a little bit of a technical problem there, Doctor, I'm sorry.
No, Jerry, and I did look in that, there's nothing in the town charter that suggests that that's necessary. So if we wanted to make a motion, I think it would be
So
differently.
Josh says so, I go with Josh. No.
Thank you.
My motion is, on September 26th at our next meeting, it's two-part. One, we will consider extending the implementation date of this ordinance to a date certain in January of 2018. And two, we will consider further other options, including rescission. And as the second part, I move that we establish, at the direction of the board, a working group under Chief Wimay's leadership, if he's so willing, and I hesitate to speak for you, Jerry, but by your
So-
smile, I hope you are.
Well, I think that's two motions, so I think you have to separate
Parts A and
them
B,
you
if
think-
there has to be two different motions, that's
Yeah,
fine.
that's the way I would do it. but-
Okay.
John,
Yep.
I just have to, I don't feel comfortable with the board making a motion on a item that was not warned specifically as a motion item.
I'm not either, I was just gonna say that.
I'm just
So
going to
I
make
think
that comment.
Yeah.
Well, if you could give me the details where it states in the, either in the town charter or the select board rules of procedure, which suggests that that is an inappropriate thing, I'd be happy to hear them. But I looked at it and I didn't see anything that states that. So again, I'm perfectly happy to, again, I'd like to work on data. I'd like to work on good information. And so that information agrees, I'm good with that.
The select board unanimously approved this agenda as it was written. This was not put as a decision item.
Well,
That's
then-
my advice to the board.
Then let's take a different tack then. Let's say this is the sentiment of the board as articulated to you. And let's have a hand vote on, is this the sentiment? Because among other things, we're going to discover is the town charter is fairly silent on rescission. So it has a lot of rules about how you get there, but it doesn't have any rules about how you get out. So we're going to potentially have, and the town attorney may very well correct me, I'm sure. I don't do you a disfavor. But no?
Sorry, respectfully, I would disagree. There is a provision.
Is it the obverse process?
There is a provision in the town charter that provides for rescission
Good.
and of this ordinance, and it would provide for that to happen within a very specified time period as
Good.
detailed in the charter.
Fantastic.
And that provision in the town charter is different from the provision in the state statute. So there's both provisions in the state statute and also in the town charter. The town charter, because it's been codified specifically towards Shelburne, does trump the provisions in the state statute, but it is very clear in the town
Good, I
charter.
stand corrected, and
And
I
I'm
thank
happy
you.
to provide you with that reference.
I stand corrected, and you don't need to do that, I'm pleased. And meanwhile, I'd advocate for a sentiment of the board as a direction to the town manager to establish this working group, and not to wait until his report Friday, and to take it up next week, yet again, another week of delay.
So are you trying for
Mr. Whitey's doing it.
the board sentiment to get
I
a
don't know
working
how to
group
make it
together
any more
easier?
clear. Are there others
Well,
in
I'm
the
just
audience who are
asking
having
politely.
difficulty understanding me?
I would like to raise a point of order. You made a motion, sir, and I didn't hear you withdraw that motion. Under parliamentary rules, when you make a motion, and if it's seconded, it has to be voted on at some point. You can't just, the chair, respectfully, sir, the chair can't just ignore it. A motion has been made.
I'm not ignoring it, and I'm trying to deal with it, I'm trying to understand what we're talking about, because it's not completely clear, even though I'm sitting right next to him, so. I understand what he's trying to say, but I think we've said it before, so, it's one of those things. So, do you want to vote on your motion, Jerry? Is that what you'd like us to
That was
do?
why I made it.
And I will second it.
Which motion?
Okay, so for the purposes of the record, would you please repeat your motion?
My motion again is that for the September 26th Shelburne Select Board meeting, I request that several options of dealing with this ordinance appear, including rescission, and that one of the options be extension of implementation of the ordinance to a date certain in January 2018. That was part A. And Part B, I move that we establish a working group under the leadership of Chief Wimay, involving staff and any interested other, to begin the process of comprehensively addressing changes that need to be made in this ordinance.
Or excision, or rescission.
Rescission already in the first motion being an option to be considered September 26th.
And we have a second
Yes, you do,
on both motions?
on both.
Okay.
I think Jerry's Part A and Part B makes sense.
So you want them to do them both as one motion?
I think
Okay.
that, unless there's a parliamentary rule that says that wouldn't be appropriate.
Well, it's Part A and Part B, so you might agree with one part and not the other
I
part.
can see that, so we can do it as two motions.
That's fine
Jerry,
with
do
me.
you agree?
Yeah, of course.
I guess I'll restate that I'm uncomfortable with the fact that you're making a motion on an item that is not warned as a decision item. I think that your town attorney would probably tell you the same thing. I'll just
Claudine, what do you
leave it
say?
at that.
I see it's not warned this way. So I would echo Joe's concern. I have a concern that you're making a motion on an item that was not properly warned, and so there may not be, any decision that comes down might not be legally permissible based on the fact that it wasn't appropriately warned.
Well, if that's the case, we can vote, and then we can move on to the alternatives.
We can deal with the legality of it in a different date if need be.
All right.
We'll deal with the legality later.
Can I approach
Certainly.
again, Travis DeMere, Shelburne Limestone, just for my clarification then, what does discuss a process and timeline to consider potential amendments to the ordinance regulating the storage, handling, and distribution of hazardous substance mean? Isn't that a warning?
No, it's just a discussion.
Okay, it's just a discussion, so that's different than if you were to warn that you're gonna have a
Yes.
vote on it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So this puts me in an uncomfortable position, but I'm going to call for a vote here, and we'll have to deal with the legal consequences of that if there are any later. So I guess we will offer a vote on this motion that Jerry's proposed for Part A. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. And Part B? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Okay. So Joe, I'd ask you to discuss this in your weekly meeting and get a working group together as quickly as we can, including the fire chief. We'll move on to item 11. Peter, I don't know if you have any,
Excuse me, sir.
yes?
I don't mean to be a pain, but you had a 2-2 vote. It's up to the chairman to announce the result of the vote. Has the vote failed, passed, or been set aside until another time? Just a question.
So a tie vote is a failure of the motion, according to the rules that we've had here, and with the instructions to the town manager to put this and address it in his weekly report. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Does a failure of this vote also negate the working committee?
No.
So a portion of it is approved?
No, I think the board gave me a directive to put out a notice that there'll be a working group that will be put together.
But if we could give a direction such as that, why can't we give a direction that on the 26th of September, we have certain items on the agenda? What's the difference?
Because it wasn't warned, Jerry. as part
Neither
of-
was the decision to establish a working group warned. It's either all or nothing by this argument I'm hearing, is it not?
No, because as far as,
You can't piece out things that you like and disregard things that you don't like.
right, and you also can't
Yeah.
disregard the legality to deal with later.
Well, then you can't have a
And-
working group. By your reaction, by the board vote, you can't have a working group either.
No, because this is under the jurisdiction of the town manager, but as the select board, we're giving him direction.
And we're not giving him
that-
direction to put an item on the agenda?
Is there any reason why that can't be a request? How do we get an item on the agenda then?
Anyone can make a.
Okay?
We just
then
did.
We just did.
Right, so
suggestion to
we'll
the chair.
take that forward and put that into the notes and put that into the agenda the next time.
All right, so we
All
can
right,
be
so-
assured it will be on the agenda.
I'll do my part, and make sure that it was talked about and we'll put it out there. But-
I'd like to apologize to you. This is-
So my name being brought up as being part of this working group, I'm going to first of all say that I'm going to have an issue with that if I have a time frame of 26 days from now. It's not going to happen. The people I've already spoken to, my initial comments on this ordinance already have made it very clear to me that this ordinance will not hold water. We already have, as both Matt and Tom have said, state and federal regulations in place that supersede any ordinance this town will write, that are very stringent, have worked very effectively for a number of years. And if I'm going to be any part of a committee, which I don't mind being, but the job needs to be done correctly. You need to have people brought in who know the field. I'm an expert in spill and control. I'm not an expert in writing law. If I got to find people to work with that, that's fine. But this is not going to happen in 26 days. You're not going to get an ordinance rewritten in 26 days. That's my only comment.
All right, we're going to move on to item 11. This is two late property tax requests. Joe or Peter, do you have any background here?
Peter's probably the best position. There should be, both of the requests are in your packets. I'm trying to pull mine up. Sorry, give me a second here. Okay, there. Peter, do you want to review these with the board?
You have two requests. I don't know which one you wanted to take up first.
I think the handwritten one
The
is the
handwritten one
first.
from Catherine
Nowoshinsky.
Chase, is it?
She's requesting waiver of the late fee, the penalty for payment of her property taxes in March of 2017. This is for property that was owned by her mother, who had passed away in February. And at that time, she did not have authority to access the estate of her mother's funds to pay the tax payment on time. She did pay it after that, but it was after the due date. And she's requesting a waiver of the $37.11 penalty as a result of not paying the March installment by March 15th.
So our precedent on this type of thing, do we have any?
Typically, if the person who's responsible for paying the property taxes has some unavoidable situation, illness, or other situation where they simply can't make the payment on time, the board has shown flexibility in waiving the penalty.
Okay.
And the total amount is on on the second page.
Yep, $37.
$37.11 is the amount of the penalty.
I move to waive the late property tax penalty for Catherine Chaz. for her mother's, Beatrice Noachensky's property at 82 Mount Philo Road in the amount of $37.11.
Second?
Second, Josh.
For discussion?
Any discussion?
I object to this. I think, and it's not strictly the matter of $37.11, which for anybody could be an extraordinary expense. But it seems to me that reading the review of activities here and the time that it took, that there could have been an effort to pay this before being subject to a fee, and I intend to vote against it.
Okay, so we have a motion seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
So 3-1. Jerry, not in favor. Josh, did you have a comment?
No, I'll make a comment after the second. I'd like to make a comment after the second
Okay.
one.
So the second matter, Peter?
This is a request from Mr. Tuzino to waive the penalty of the August property tax installment, which was due August 15th. He was called out of the country, according to his transmittal to Joe Colangelo, due to a health issue with his mother. Unfortunately, he had signed up to have his property tax payment taken automatically out of his bank account on the due date, but at that time there weren't sufficient funds in the account, so the transaction did not go through. He is acknowledging that there weren't enough funds, and he corrected the situation as soon as he knew about it. But under the circumstances dealing with his mother's health issue, he did not do that in time, so that the payment did not go through on the 15th as was the due date.
Does all this
What's
check
the
out,
amount?
like he's on auto pay?
He has been on
and-
auto pay for several years, and it's gone through okay. This time it did get returned for non-sufficient funds.
And then was there a written note that said he had already paid when he tried to bring in a check?
He came in the day after the due date, on August 16th. At that time, we had not been notified that the ACH transaction, the automatic payment, had been rejected. Usually it takes several days up to a week for that. So we returned the check to him, thinking that he had already paid it automatically. In any case, that was after the due date, so it was after the 15th, so the penalty still stood. So the fact that he brought a check in to replace the automatic payment on the 16th did not negate the fact that it was still late. It was received after the 15th.
So he was late one day, Peter?
Yes.
What's the amount, Peter?
$258.47.
And has
So-
there been any history of late payments in the past?
Not recently that I could find.
I move to waive the $258.44 late property tax penalty fee for Mr. Guy Toussaint at 187 Ridgefield Road.
Second?
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Thank you, Peter.
All right. The comment that I'd like to make is that each time one of these questions comes up, and I think I've made a similar comment in the past, I'm really uncomfortable with the process that is based on known precedents that have been set. I'm not quite sure why we can't have a fairly clear description of when and when not would these things be approved or disapproved, with regard to timeframes, with regard to if we want to make absolute finite decisions. That's fine with me too. What really troubles me is that it all seems very squishy. And I think people would like, I think if we had fairly firm, and unless these things exist that I don't know about, other than the statements that I think Peter will think that, you must pay your property taxes on time. If we have situations where we do grant remission or, waiver of these, then they need to be well-defined so they're not, this is what we think this week, or this is what the last select board did, or this. I don't see why that's a difficult thing. And so I would suggest that we come up with some kind of mechanism to codify what the criteria are for waiving these kinds of fees.
Well, Josh, it doesn't happen very often, so I guess I'll publicly state I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
I think that, it'd be nice, I wonder if this is because it's, at least public record versus, having to put the onus on Peter to kind of make these judgment decisions. I don't know, Peter, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm just the messenger.
Yeah.
I'm not the tax collector. Technically, the town manager is, so I would have to defer to Joe's opinion as to, I'm providing you with the facts I was given. I don't have authority to waive it. I don't think statute provides that. I believe it's, the board or town manager as tax collector's decision. So I guess to your comment, Josh, I'm not sure we can cover every possibility because I've seen every reason people were late. So I doubt you're going to be able to cover, even if you do a written policy, there's probably going to be some things that will come through that it just doesn't consider.
Sorry, I also want to make the point to the board. I mean, there's a lot of these that I deal with over the phone. I mean, there's very few that kind of get to the select board, and it seems like no matter what we think about, there's always some sort of issue that you can't always consider. Josh, I'd be happy to sit down and work with you on a policy, or, if you want to develop one and the board can look at it. I mean, right now, it's just in the charter, it says basically per select board discretion.
Right.
And, we do try to work these out at the lowest level when possible. A few of these get through, probably at least once a quarter, you have one in front of you. I guess I would say, great, Josh, I would be happy to work with you on a policy or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
I'll work on that.
Great. Thank you, Josh. We'll move to item 12, which is the first draft of the capital improvement plan.
I think Peter has a quick presentation. To be honest with you, me, Peter, and Ann haven't had a chance to really look through these since they came back from the department heads. So this is a first draft for all of us, just in terms of process before we get into the CIP itself. So this is, I would say, the first step in our long march towards town meeting for putting together next year's budget. In order to stay somewhat on track, I'll ask the select board to warn a public hearing. I'll look up the date while I'm saying this, for the first meeting in October. That will give us this meeting, the following meeting, to discuss it, make comments, make suggestions, make edits, not just with the select board, but the public, with department heads. Furthermore, it will give Peter and me the opportunity to present it to the Planning Commission, which is a requirement of state statute for capital plans. And it will keep us somewhat on track for making our budget deadlines. So I'm just trying to put this in context for the entire process, and we do update this annually. Okay.
So as Joe said, this is an annual process we go through each year. The board's familiar with it. But it is a program basically where we look at what the capital needs are for the town coming up in the next 5 years, starting with the current year and the following 5 years after that. So that's the capital budget and program, capital improvement plan. Sometimes it's referred to as the same thing. So we're just in the process of updating it like we do annually. It was adopted last year, and now we're looking at re-adopting it because it goes for a 5-year period. So each year you extend it out 1 year past the prior year. So the capital improvement plan is actually a 6-year plan. It starts with a current fiscal year that we're in right now, that the budget has been approved for and that we're actually operating under, and the following 5 years after that. Projects, again, included in, putting it in the capital budget and program or capital improvement plan is not a guarantee the projects will happen. The only projects that will happen are the projects in year 1, which is in the year we're in right now. Those funds have been approved either by budget vote or by bond vote or by grants. So those are going to take place. But the projects in years 2 through 6 are just, at this point, are plans, and they may come to fruition, they may not. Over the next 3 or 4 years, projects come and projects go. That's the annual process that we follow. So again, just to emphasize, just because it's in the capital improvement plan does not mean that the projects are going to take place unless it's in this current fiscal year, which has already been funded. The purpose of the capital budget and program, again, is to provide a long-term view of what types of capital projects are we looking at over the next 5 years. And to plan to minimize large fluctuations, to try to space them out so that you're not putting a lot of projects in 1 year, to try to spread out the tax burden or the water sewer rate burden, depending upon where the project is, and to take a long-term view of what types of things are coming up. Another reason we have the capital improvement program is that if we have impact fees, which we currently do in place for recreation fields and paths, and also the CVU expansion several years ago, there's an impact fee that was put in place for that. But by state statute, you cannot have an impact fee unless that project is in an adopted capital budget and program. So in order to charge an impact fee, it has to be part of this plan. And also grant applications. One thing that can strengthen a grant application is to say that it's been in our capital plan for the last 3 or 4 years. It says the town's thought about it, the select board's approved it and voted on it, and that therefore it's a legitimate project that's been given consideration, not something that just came up suddenly. The project costs in this plan, and I've got some drafts here of all the programs in it, but as Joe said, this is really a very first rough draft. Some of the committees that normally review this over the summer didn't meet last month or so, so we'll be getting to them this month. But in this current draft, again, compared to the last year when it was adopted, general fund would be the town budget. The types of projects that are in there add up to that amount. Again, this is over a 6-year period, so it's obviously some pretty big numbers. And then we also separate out the wastewater or sewer budget and the water fund. In terms of the types of projects, the total, you can see the total is about the same as last year, but it's a little bit redistributed between the various funds. How the funding takes place, again, you've got grants and donations that fund some of it. Some of it is out through a loan, long-term loan, repaid either by fees or taxes. Also, we do put money aside each year for new highway trucks, new police cruisers, and those are funded out of the budget each year with no financing needed. And then also some budgets are, some items are funded each year just out of the budget. We do have capital improvements that are done each year, storm drain work and things like that, that we have embedded in our budget funds to do that, so it doesn't require necessarily financing. Again, just looking at the total projects that we've got in this plan, and this is just for the general fund projects, not for the water sewer funds. Total over the 6-year period of about $23 million. This is the breakdown of how they're funded, and you can see about 1/3 of it would be funded through grants, donations, non-tax property tax sources. Some of it is funded through a loan. If it's a large project, like a fire truck, that's financed over several years, so about half of the funding is from long-term financing. Some of it, as I said in the previous slide, is money put aside each year. For instance, for police cruisers, we budget for those, so we don't have to finance them. That's kind of embedded in the budget. And then also just other projects that are just paid out of the general fund each year. For instance, the highway budget has money for storm drain improvements. Some of those may be capital improvements that we would do just out of the budget and not have to get a grant for or finance. The major projects, I'm not going to go through, there's probably 50 or 60 projects anyway in the plan, but as far as some of the high points, the major projects under the infrastructure category, these have all been in previous versions of the plan. The Bay Road Bridge, and again, we'll need to fine-tune some of this. I'm not sure I've got the correct year in there, but we'll be working on making those adjustments before the second version. Storm drain repairs, we know that in some cases we've got storm drain systems that are failing and that those need to be replaced. The stormwater projects you've heard about in terms of what we're going to be mandated to do for the Monroe Flow Restoration Plan. That's going to be a big item certainly within the next 6 years. And also in last year's plan we had some work, or had it included in one of the later years, to do some upgrades to the Bay Road underpass where the railroad is. Again, these are all projects, again, year one would be the year we're in right now, and you go out from there in terms of where each one would fall on that time frame. Under emergency services, in this year's plan, we had to replace one of the fire trucks. That's happened. It's here now. It's in the station. Credit to the fire department for managing that project, but it's here and on budget. In year three, the existing rescue boat, they're thinking would need to be replaced in that time frame. Again, this is just a plan, but that's kind of on their horizon at this point. For Shelburne Rescue, they'll have an ambulance. They keep their ambulances for about 10 years, 2 of them, and every 5 years one gets replaced. Next year one would be replaced as far as the plan. Shelburne Rescue is able to fund that out of their own revenues, so there's no tax burden to that. Linda reminds me of that every year, right? Police cruisers, we have those that are replaced, the patrol cars. We have 4 of those. There's a chief's vehicle, an unmarked vehicle. And I kind of highlighted in my memo, I thought they really did a nice analysis of the replacements for their cruisers. We used to have 3 cruisers that we would rotate. We would do 1 cruiser, replace it 1 year, and then another year we'd be replacing 2 cruisers. And it would go 2-1, 2-1, 2-1 like that. Several years ago, we upgraded to 4 patrol cars in the fleet. And the question was that going to save us money? And we never really got that question answered clearly. But I attached a memo in your package, and it's also online, from Officer Dan Eichenberg and also Acting Chief Aaron Noble, did an analysis of looking at the replacement cycle for our vehicles and the cruisers. And what they found, Dan actually did quite an analysis of the mileage, and what he found was the new cruisers we were getting each year, everybody wanted to use them. Kind of logical, you got a new cruiser, let's use it. So that was rolling up the mileage on that cruiser, which kind of caught up with the other 2, so that what they're looking at now is to try to make sure that those are operated on a more even schedule. And their analysis showed that now they think if we do 2 cruisers, replace 2 cruisers this year, the following 2 years we can do 1 each. So instead of going 2-1, 2-1, 2-1, we replace 2 cruisers 1 year, 1 the next, 1 the next. Whether that'll work or not, that's yet to be tested, but again, I just want to acknowledge the work similar to what was mentioned earlier about the work the police department is doing. They're also looking at the price of the cruisers. Right now we do use, they're replaced with 2 SUV type vehicles, Chevrolet and a Ford. I'm not picking one brand over another, but I'll say there's a $10,000 difference between the two brands. One's larger, one's smaller. But again, they're looking at, for the fleet, does it make sense to buy more of the less expensive ones? They're looking at a 3-year life because typically that's the life of a warranty, 3 years. Again, they get heavy use, and also for maintenance agreements, those go 3 years. So a lot of good work there. I think you're going to see some savings in terms of how they're managing the fleet, and I give the police department credit, particularly Dan and Aaron, for taking on that project. Police radio upgrades, they will be doing that. We'd like to do that next year, so you'll probably be seeing that in their budget proposal that'll be coming in the fall. They're replacing those for a digital type radio that's more efficient, carries more frequencies, and also allows them to communicate with other police departments. So you'll see that in their request. The ones I've underlined here are new projects that weren't in the previous version. They've also upgraded this year to some security measures. So each officer now has their own taser and carries their own body camera. That's been recommended by consultants and is best practice to have that equipment. Before, we didn't have it for everybody. It was kind of passed around. So now this year they have actually got that equipment in place. This year it's been funded by a donation, so it's fully funded, not from taxes, and it will probably be funded the same way for the next several years. But that's an item that's actually been implemented this year and will be carried forward in the later years. And also, in looking at the police department, we've been in this building for about 16 years. The downstairs obviously is used 24/7 with the police department and the officers' room and their record storage and all of that. The thinking with Aaron at this point is that that's not the best space, that it could be reorganized. The furniture's been there for 16 years and it's used 24/7. So things obviously need to be replaced, but he does have some ideas about how to rework that area for the officers, record storage, and those types of things to operate more efficiently. We'll probably be having a discussion about that coming up again in the fiscal year budget discussion. Other areas, buildings and grounds, the library building, obviously we know that's a bond issue that'll be coming up in November, so that's on our plan at this point. Buildings and grounds equipment, our grounds and maintenance manager, Darwin Norris, feels that he needs to upgrade his equipment to a tractor with a bucket loader on it to make his work a little bit easier for trail maintenance, and also a vehicle so that we can get out and easily regrade and fill storm drainage and wash-offs on some of our trails. So he's looking at some equipment there. On the highway garage, one thing, the wing on the highway garage where the offices are has a leaky roof. They are proposing to upgrade that next year. That will be in Paul's budget to put on a new roof there, and then also do some maintenance work on the building where there's been some corrosion with the metal siding. And then the recreation department, or recreation committee, will be talking to you again about the beach house project that was brought up last year. Still very much a priority for theirs, so to be hearing more about that. On streets, these were some projects that we had put in last year. I don't know if they'll make it in the next draft or not, but it's something we will be discussing at least internally with staff and with the board. There was a project to do some upgrades to the Falls Road Route 7 intersection. The thoughts that at least last year, was there would be some grant funds available for that. Upgrading Falls Road to have a better streetscape profile for that. Again, some grant funding. Again, these were projects that were certainly not in the early years, but mid to late years. And the same thing has been talked about, it's been in the last several versions, was a possible connector road from Harrington Avenue looping around into the Shelburne Shopping Park. Some of those projects have been on the plans for several years. Again, if there's a potential of a grant, it strengthens our case if it's in the plan, but it's not a commitment to do them. The bike ped projects, some of those had been completed this year. Actually, Ann was working on the first two that are now completed. The sidewalk, Route 7 from the town center to the museum, that's a year one project. We're in year one, it's done. Same thing, there was a section on Falls Road, in the Falls Road Bridge area. New sidewalk was put in there this summer, that was completed. Safety improvements in the village area, we put some money aside in this year's budget for some of the traffic calming measures that have taken place. Likely we'll be putting money or proposing in the plan that we continue that for some other years. The Bay Road corridor improvements, again, some of the work that's been done there near the underpass, continuing to do that. Again, that will be something that we'll talk to staff about as to how much is in there and whether we continue it going forward. And then also the project that we just did apply for grant funding for, sidewalk bike ped path from the Falls Road Bridge up through Irish Hill Road and into Thompson Hill, into the development up there. We do have a grant application out for that project, so we'll see if that's successful or not. But that's another project that the Bike Ped Committee has had on their priority list. So next steps, what happens next? refine the project list and timing. Again, it's a very rough draft at this point. We need to follow up with the committees and so forth, which we'll be doing this month. Second draft will be available for your next meeting for comment. And then, as Joe said, we would plan on adopting the plan, hopefully, or it could be extended if need be, on October 10th. Same process we followed each year.
And I would just add to Peter, this is already posted online, but, certainly we'd be soliciting input not just on September 26th and October 10th, but in between there as well.
I've got extra copies here if anyone wants to go through all the 50 or 60 projects one by one. You're welcome to do that.
Gail?
Thanks, Peter. I just have a couple of questions. Is there any thought given to putting money into the capital plan for improvements to the wastewater treatment facility, which has had a lot of breaks in the last year or two? And it might be some things that need to be constantly upgraded, whether it's technology or equipment. A second thing, have you given thought to using fuel-efficient vehicles for the new purchases? And the third thing is, in the other roads and things, is there any thought at this point, or is it too soon? There's been a study done of the southern part of Route 7. And is there any thought to planning ahead for that so that funds could be available in that consideration?
I can answer a couple of those questions. As far as the wastewater, we did have a $3 million bond that was passed a couple of years ago, and Chris Robinson is working on a project list. I don't have that specific list, that's what they are, but he's actually going out to bid now for some improvements. I'm not sure those, I think some of those are for the treatment plant and collection system. That'll continue for the next several years. We can get a better list from him as to what he's doing to coincide with that. As far as the fuel-efficient vehicles, with the police department, we did bring up, I know Josh asked last year, what about hybrids or fuel-efficient vehicles there? And they did look at that. There's a little bit of a concern just because police cruisers draw a lot of electricity to operate the equipment that are in them. So they have some concerns about that, but it is a technology that's starting to be out there. As far as the other vehicles, the highway trucks, I guess I'd have to talk to our mechanic about that. I'm not sure there's a whole variety of fuel-efficient plow trucks out there. But I think the police cruisers are probably the ones we would be looking at because they're out on the road so much. And obviously, you want to have that kind of fuel efficiency, but you want to not at the expense of safety or slower response time or reliability issues. So they're looking at it, and actually that was one of the memos I attached, that Dan had contacted one of the manufacturers to see what's going on. They're just starting to come out with those, and we'll certainly be looking at that. The last question about Route 7, Joe, you might be better at answering that, I think, as far as what's
It's something that
planned.
we'll have to, talk about at the next meeting, for sure. So keep it on the front burner.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions? Any comments from the board?
Well, I'd just like to somewhat repeat comments that I made last meeting about the whole planning process of these kinds of things, that I really think the town would benefit to incorporate both this and the next item into a strategic plan. And I think there's really a value for the town approaching these kinds of planning things on a longer range basis. We do this on a 6-year basis, and I think we have to look at these things on a long term. I suggest that we do put this on as an agenda item. I know there are people in the town that have a lot of expertise with strategic planning, and maybe one would be willing to come in and just talk about a strategic planning process and the value of it. But I think rather than just going on these year-to-year things, I mean, we're looking out 6 years here. I just think it's a process that can integrate a lot of these kinds of long-range things and engage discussion about where the town is going, what are the priorities, where do we need to go, which I don't think we really do on a annual basis. So usually 5-year plans are, could be 5 years, could be 10 years. But I think it would be a valuable exercise.
Jerry, anything?
No, I'm all set.
Colin? So I'll entertain a motion to consider adopting the,
Warren public
no,
hearing
warn a public hearing, sorry,
for October 10th.
for October 10th.
So moved. For the consideration of Shelburne's FY 2017-2018 through
Second.
FY 22-23 capital improvement plan.
Moved by Colleen, seconded by Jerry. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. 4-0.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. So we're going to review the second final draft of the CIP. Ann, you're up.
I'll turn it over to Ann, but I'd call it the second draft. It's kind of a living, breathing thing. We did send out another version to the board via PDF to take into account Josh's comment about the Board of Civil Authority being an elected body, which he is correct. So we made that change and sent that out to the board electronically. I'll turn it over to Ann at this point.
And Josh, my apologies, that was my bad. I totally forgot about that. So we keep getting to this subject when we're all worn out from all the other discussions. So I was expecting that might happen again tonight, so I won't take too much of your time. I wrote up a memo so you could get a better idea of the conversations that I have had with department heads and how this document got to be where it's at. I would ask you to just take note of a couple things tonight. First of all, I'd like to say that you should totally disregard the public safety or organizational plan. I've heard from the fire and rescue chiefs that they're not happy with it, and we've been trying to set up a meeting with them, and I hope we have one set up now. Good. So we are going to get together and redo this until everyone is happy with it. So that will be a change. I also want to have you take note of the water department has made a small change. They would like us to start thinking about doing some in-house cross-training for staff. What Rick says is that it takes quite an enormous amount of time to learn the system. And if one of our technicians were to leave the department and there was an incident that needed attention right away, we would be in trouble. So it would be good to get some of this intellectual knowledge somewhere else on town staff. So we're going to start thinking about that and looking at that. Not that we'd be adding staff there, but we'd be seeing if there'd be someone in another department that might be interested in learning the system.
The Water Commission looked at that last night at their meeting, and they
That's right.
felt good about it as well.
That's
For
right.
what it's worth.
And then lastly, the police department, which is in the back of your plan. There's 2 additional things that we've added since the last meeting. These are things that we have been talking about for quite some time, and now are actually a possibility. The first one is having an embedded social worker. This is something that the whole region, excluding Burlington, is looking at as a response to the spike in the suicide rate that all the town managers have been talking about. We're all very concerned about this. And we all had the very good idea that social workers can handle mental health crises possibly more effectively than our police officers, and our police officers agree with that. Our police chiefs in all our towns agree with that. Burlington has an embedded social worker, and the rest of us don't. However, a lot of the folks who need our help, they cross boundaries all the time. And so we're going to have continued discussions about this. We have not figured out how much this is going to cost, but we're looking at 4 embedded social workers across 5 towns. So when we know more about cost, we'll probably be looking to get that into a future budget as soon as possible to address the need. And if we can't get it into the budget, we might start looking at other things like donations for that. And then secondly, we have been working with CVOEO and Steps to End Domestic Violence and the Howard Center on this idea of helping the vulnerable homeless. There is a fairly large population of homeless people who are vulnerable in the sense that they don't have the skills to take the steps they need to get into permanent housing. There is housing for them. It's just that the paperwork involved is more than they can handle. And so the idea has come up that this intensive housing navigator would sort of hold these people's hands and help them through this process and get them into permanent housing like the Beacon Apartments. This is something no one else is really talking about. These groups came to us because of their experience at Harbor Place. This vulnerable population is vulnerable to the more violent of the homeless population, so they really do need our help. So we're going to be looking at how to do this. Joe came up with the fabulous idea of possibly making it an internship in the MSW program. We've reached out to the internship coordinator there, and I've just got a voicemail voicemail back from her today of the options that we have in terms of getting an internship going. So there's a very real possibility that we can do this in the near future. And this person would be reporting to our police department.
Right. That's great.
I'm sure you and Joe have already thought of it, but what an ideal mentoring potential there is with our social services committee, with some of the professionals on there. I want to make a general comment relating to both the capital improvement plan and the OIP. I think it's greatly rewarding to see the continued maturation of this process. In budget, there's always a tension between focusing on minutia because they're the easiest things to understand in front of you, and they often are only a paragraph high, And I don't know whether that's a residue from town meetings where every article, every expenditure had its own article, and we segmented in that way, or quite what. But at the same time, we often talk about the big picture. There's no big picture here without the help of this and the capital improvement plan. And the fact that not only you work hard on it and are perfecting it, but update it each year is an enormous benefit to me, to anybody considering budget altogether. It's almost to the point where I'd feel handicapped if we were trying to budget items without the big picture that this represents and the thought that's gone into it. The other quick comment I have is that in my experience, there were fairly stringent regulations regarding manhole entrance and other hazardous material proximity in sewer plants, to the extent there had to be 2 people. Always had to be 2 people, without fail. And having administered some plants, I can recall situations in which that was a real difficult situation. Somebody was out, nobody was qualified. That's not an easy thing to think. But I was a little concerned, and it's just to pass on the concern to you and Joe, that there may be an issue of safety in our plants with only one person available.
I think that can happen from time to time when there's only one person at a plant. And that's based on the size of the staff we have and where the types of things they might be working
Yeah.
on. And, the danger is if something were to happen to one of those individuals and there was no one there to help them immediately.
You wouldn't recover them in time.
Possibly
No,
not.
I'm very concerned. I
so
know it makes it very difficult to stay with an operating schedule, a maintenance schedule, and lots of other things. I've been there, done that. But boy, there's nothing more hazardous than dropping into a hole and having nobody upstairs
I know
in
they
case
do
something
check
goes
on
wrong.
each other regularly when those situations occur.
Yeah.
They're all very safety conscious, and I have to say that
Yeah.
more than any other department, they have totally embraced our safety requirements in terms of trainings. They're really all over it.
Yeah.
However, that said, anything can happen, and I do think that is something we should be looking
Yeah.
at when we're looking at budgets.
Yeah, I agree, Ann.
Yeah.
I agree with that, yeah.
And back to your point, Jerry, on the Social Services Committee, I am on their agenda for their next meeting.
Oh,
To
fantastic.
talk to them about these roles and other things having to do with suicide prevention.
'Cause that could expand the benefit of the experience for an intern.
Absolutely.
Working
I
with some of
agree.
them, they all being pros, and
Well, and
if
we
you
might
needed
be
to beef
asking
up
for-
the experience, to qualify in some person's mind as an actual internship, that's just talking out loud, I'm sorry, but.
No, and we
that's a
might be
great
asking
idea.
for their support, with the ideas that, we're talking about, but, possibly also with some donations to get some of these things off the ground.
Good, I think it's a great idea, Ann, yeah.
So Ann, thank you very much for correcting the thing, and not to beat you around the head and shoulders about this, but if you're gonna do that, then on page 4, which is where you have the appointed committees and boards, you can just remove the BCA from that.
I think in the updated version that went out over line, that was taken care of.
It was in there, but
maybe,
I took out
maybe.
the word appointed, actually.
Oh,
and just-
okay,
and ma-
that
and
would be
make-
fine. That'd be fine. Yeah, I
Have a
didn't
different
print
approach,
out the,
but
I didn't print out the other
Got to
one.
the same place.
Okay, and the second point is, going back to what I said about the capital improvement, we do that on a 6-year basis. I still don't have a time frame where any of these changes would be made, and that would be really helpful to really know sort of what you're thinking about in that, all right, year 1, year 2, year 3 kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I have to say, I'm not thinking about that. When I meet with departments, they're telling me what they're thinking about, what their top priorities are. So I think this is a guide map so that when we get into budget time, you guys will have to decide what's your highest priority, because I don't think budget-wise we could do all of these things without a pretty big spike in the tax rate. So it's just a matter of figuring out, what we think is the most important. Is there a life and death situation? Maybe that should be the priority. Is there some want to do but don't really need to do kind of things? What could be put off until next year? How do we want to prioritize the list?
Right, well, not to be a broken record, but those are the kinds of things you do in a strategic planning session. You try to figure out how to prioritize things.
Well, even short of that, I think the obvious benefit here is to think to yourself, we may need 4 or 5 full-time equivalent positions in a fairly idealized situation. And immediately, how would you prioritize that in budget? Well, safety has to be pretty major. The safety not only of existing staff, but any new staff. And that's what this provokes in terms of thinking. So I'm kind of okay with timelessness here, more so than what our vision is and what steps we're going to take toward it.
If
Yeah.
next year you want me to present
Yeah.
this with what I consider my priorities, I'd be happy to do that.
Hey, yeah,
I have strong opinions, so
you're not only late, but you're in color, and now you're offering some real valuable information, right?
but I'd defer to you on that. if you
Good
want
job,
that.
really good job.
I think it should be noted that this is the second time we've seen this. So Josh is already looking for a 10-year strategic plan, and we're just getting, the fundamentals done so we have a picture of what it is. So I think that, we have to be patient with this, and I say that in the spirit of, this is a great start, and we don't want to diminish its effort.
It wasn't
So
diminishing at all. It just,
No,
for
just-
me, I was just saying it would helpful to sort of get an idea of that long-term planning
No,
concept.
I appreciate that thought.
Thanks,
Well
Sam.
done.
Appreciate it.
Good job, man.
So our final item for the evening is number 14, which is the resolution for the library bond vote.
No, we have a point.
Yeah, number 15 will take
Oh, is there another?
half a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. So with 14, I don't know if you have any comments to the document.
I don't have any comments to the document. I had some general comments, if that's
That's
acceptable.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, just with the item, I certainly will vote in favor of setting the bond thing, because I think the Shelburne residents obviously are the ones who have to make a decision on making that decision, as to what has been termed the largest expenditure in Shelburne history. So I think it's the right place for that to happen. And I think everybody's in agreement that the space is there. There's a need for a new space, and I've got to applaud the library board and the steering committee for addressing those kinds of issues and coming up with a very beautiful building and siting and that would meet those needs. And so I think that's great, and they've been really excellent in communicating all of this process to the rest of me. However, in going through this and looking at my notes and comments of people who have asked me about this, there still seem to be some outstanding questions in this whole process, and I'll go through them just to recognize that whereas this is a great idea for the town, there's still going to be concerns about the cost, and that ties into the comments that have been made a number of times about town expenditures and where's all this money coming from. There was another there are other comments. These are ones that have been made by others that are there less expensive options? I know this was brought up in one of the things, but I don't think it was really defined what that series of options might be. And I think for a lot of people, knowing what the different things were and how the committees ended up at this point might be helpful. The next one, and I think I asked this before, is sort of a comparison of operating costs between what it's costing to run our library now and what this larger new building. I know it has a lot of energy efficient things, so I think, but it's also my understanding when you build a new building and it's got a lot of electronics in it, that even though it may cost less in energy, there may be a lot of other costs in managing the technology to keep the building running. So I think that I looked through and I didn't see any influence like that. And then probably the last thing was sort of talking about the reorganization of the town center and the access to the road and how this affects the fire department and how, what that change would be to the, fire response, and are there any problems associated with that? I think some of those things may have come up, but I just couldn't, put my hand. So even though I think this is a good thing to go forward, I still think there are some issues that might be helpful to to look at. That's it.
Jerry, do you have anything?
No.
Colleen?
Josh, maybe we can schedule a phone call, and I'm happy to go through these things. And, I think that if you still have a question and you were at the meetings where most of this stuff was discussed, then maybe I can go back to the steering committee and we can have an article that explains these specific questions that goes into the newspaper.
It's not just me.
I
That's
know.
why I'm bringing it up. It's
But
just
I'm
because-
if you have this question, you were here at the meeting, then I'm assuming that other people would have this question. And I know that Laura, the previous librarian, was really good about putting things in the Shelburne News about these specific things. I can look back and see what's been published already, but I'll bring this up to the steering committee.
Thank you. I think that'd be great. It's like you want something to be successful, and that would.
We'll cover all the bases.
So, sorry, John, I just want to say the documents that are here for you to sign have been reviewed by our bond counsel. We actually use a different entity than our town attorney. So this is, I guess, the last step in having the special town meeting move forward. So there's 2 documents for the select board to sign.
So because of the statutory requirement, we need to make a motion adopting and signing the resolution and warning for a special town meeting on November 7th for voter consideration of $6.5 million bond for new library renovations to the town hall and improvements to the municipal campus, and set a public hearing date for November 6th, 2017, and October 24th, 2017. So I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
A motion by Jerry, a second.
Second.
Second by Colleen. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's 4-0. Thank you. And the last item, sorry I missed that there was another page, is the appointment to the CBC Stormwater Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
Joe?
So real quickly, we're actually, I guess I'll just call it kind of being jovial, a trade. One of, I believe her name is Luce Hillman. She was originally appointed. She has informed us subsequent to her appointment at the last meeting that she just doesn't have time for this in her schedule. The good news is that she was a licensed civil engineer, and she's being replaced by Mike Schramm, who is also a local licensed engineer. So we're kind of getting a similar skill set on the committee. And Mike did attend the preliminary, or the first meeting of the Stormwater Advisory Committee 2 weeks ago. So I'm just looking for the select board to formally appoint him moving forward.
Any comments? So I have a motion from Jerry, a second. Second from Colleen.
Do we have a time frame, or is it just until no longer necessary? Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion from Colleen.
Second.
Second from Jerry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Good night.